Hi, everyone. My name is Issa. I'm the marketing manager for Tour Teen, as well as the school and library marketing manager for Tom Doherty Associates. On behalf of the Tour Teen team, I am so thrilled to welcome you all to our first ever Crowdcast live event, Empathy Over Stigma. In recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month, we have three phenomenal authors joining us for a candid conversation on mental health representation in YA. Before I introduce our authors, there are a few things I do want to mention regarding tonight's event, especially for any of you out there who may be new to Crowdcast. First thing I want to mention, since this is a live event and technology can be unpredictable, there is always a chance we might experience technical difficulties. If that should happen, please be patient and bear with us as we do our best to fix the issue. Feel free to engage with your fellow attendees during the broadcast via the chat. Regarding the structure of our event, we asked our authors to submit questions relating to the topic of mental health and YA that they wanted to ask each other. The first portion of tonight's event will be dedicated to that. However, the last 10 to 15 minutes of our event will be dedicated to fan questions. This weekend leading up to our event, we received a handful of questions from followers, but we also want to hear from you, our attendees. So if you have a question for one or all three of our authors, please submit your question via the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, I want to draw your eyes to the green button directly below our broadcast that says Support Empathy Over Stigma. At any point during or after our event, please click that button to access links to mental health resources. And in addition, we've also created a listicle featuring the exciting upcoming titles from each of tonight's guest authors. Featured titles include TJ Klune's The Extraordinaries, Mark Oshiro's Each of Us a Desert, and Lauren Shippen's A Neon Darkness. All three titles are available for pre-order now. The Extraordinaries and Each of Us a Desert both have pre-order campaigns currently running. So if you submit your receipt to Tour Teen, you will receive a special gift with your purchase. Also, I am excited to share that in just a couple of weeks, we will also be launching a pre-order campaign for A Neon Darkness. So please pre-order your copy tonight, hold on to your receipt, and follow us on social to be one of the first to learn more about the pre-order campaign for Neon Darkness once it's been announced. And now it is time to introduce our authors. The first author I will bring up to the screen is Mark Oshiro. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Issa. I miss you.
Oh my gosh, I miss you too. Okay, Mark, I'm going to gush about you now, so get ready.
Okay.
Mark Oshiro's stunning debut novel, Anger is a Gift, was honored with the 2019 Schneider Family Book Award for Best Teen Book. Upon its release, nicely done. The timing on that.
The timing.
Perfect.
I'm all about timing.
Love it. Upon its release, Anger is a Gift was a smashing success and received countless praise from media outlets, educators, librarians, and readers, and still continues to do so. This fall, Mark segues into the world of YA fantasy with their highly anticipated second novel, Each of Us a Desert. Set against a magical desert landscape where stories and one's deepest secrets come to life, this novel is a queer Latinx coming-of-age tale about two young women struggling to find their place in the world while navigating identity, loss, and first love. Each of Us a Desert is out September 15th. Mark, thank you for being here with us.
I'm so excited.
Okay, next up, we have TJ Klune.
What up? Hi.
Thank
you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for being here. TJ Klune is the Lambda Literary Award-winning author of The House in the Cerulean Sea, his breakout fantasy, which released this past March under Tor, as well as many other books for adults. The Extraordinaries is TJ's YA debut, a funny and charming queer coming-of-age story about a fanboy with ADHD and the heroes he loves. The Extraordinaries is out July 14th. TJ, we're so happy you could join us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And last but certainly not least, we have Lauren Shippen.
Hello, and the helicopters that are always flying over LA.
We're off to a great start.
Yes.
I'm so glad to be here.
No, tell it to go away. I'm talking about you. Lauren Shippen, author of The Infinite Noise, is a writer best known for her work in fiction podcasts. She is the creator and sole writer of the popular audio drama The Bright Sessions. Lauren Shippen's Bright Sessions YA series is based on her acclaimed podcast centering on the lives of a group of young people coming to terms with their super abilities with help from a mysterious therapist named Dr. Bright. A Neon Darkness is the second standalone novel set in the Bright Sessions universe and revolves around the untold origin story of supervillain Damien, the bad guy that millions of listeners love to hate and millions of new readers are about to meet. A thrilling and thoughtful fantasy that tackles and explores themes of found family, queerness, power, and consent. A Neon Darkness is out September 29th, as well as the paperback edition of the first standalone novel in the Bright Session series, The Infinite Noise. Lauren, so happy you could be here with us today.
Oh, I'm so happy. It's such an honor to be with these two incredible authors.
Yeah. All right, everyone, please enjoy our event. Authors, I am passing over the screen to all of you. Mark.
Last words.
This will be super
And now we
good.
control it.
I'm gonna turn
Yes.
my screen off, but I'll be monitoring the background. So I'm here with you.
Thank you, Isa.
Of course, Mark, we're gonna start with your question for TJ
All right.
and Lauren. And again, thank you everyone for joining, and please enjoy Empathy Over Stigma.
Wonderful. I love how someone. I was going to close the chat because it's slightly distracting. I want to read it.
Yeah, it totally is. I had to peek at it.
Yeah, I love that everyone noticed that we're all wearing black because it's the best color. So fantastic. Excellent.
Amazing.
Actually, before I go into my question, I love that we wrote such deep, incredibly complex questions for one.
I know, right?
did not
I
go
was worried
into
I was
all.
going overboard with it, and
No,
then I
no,
saw
no.
you guys, and I was like, "Oh, we're fine."
Oh yeah,
totally
no, we're
good.
fine. How about the three of us? I would like it if we could talk about our work that's coming out or work that just came out or whatnot, and how it relates to mental illness, in case there's someone in the audience who is watching this and enjoying this and not quite familiar with our work. So TJ, if you want to start.
Oh yeah, definitely. July 14th, I have my YA debut. It comes out from Tortine, and it's called The Extraordinaries. And The Extraordinaries is about a somewhat obsessive fanboy with ADHD who loves the superheroes that protect his city, so much so that he writes self-insert fan fiction about them. And he decides in his infinite wisdom one day, after a chance encounter with one of the superheroes that he writes about, that he himself wants to become extraordinary, and he will do it with or without the help of his best friend and most likely the love of his life, Seth. And this book is an experience, man. It is loud, it is queer, it is brash, it is in your face, and it is, I think, something that we could all use right now, especially with how dire times seem to be. But this book is funny, and it's sad, and it's happy, and it's all over the place, kind of like Nick himself, because he has ADHD like I do. And I wanted to be able to put someone like me, give voice to neurodivergent people like myself. Because we really don't get to see ourselves very often in fiction. So I wanted to give a voice to people like me out there who have a billion thoughts at once and sometimes say them all out loud at the same exact time. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lauren.
Awesome. I have a book out currently called The Infinite Noise, and my second book, A Neon Darkness, comes out in September, as Isa says. And both of them take place in this universe I've been working in since 2015, mostly in podcasts and now in books, which is the universe of the Bright Sessions. And in this world, there are these people called atypicals who have supernatural abilities, except they're not the X-Men. Mostly these abilities are actually pretty hard to live with, and are often spurred on by trauma or a mental health issue. In the podcast, I play a time traveler who time travels involuntarily whenever she has panic attacks, because I've been having panic attacks since I was a kid, and I started to think about what would happen if, instead of just my body feeling like it was falling apart, I went somewhere back in time, because that would be cooler. And then my first book is about two of the teenagers in the show, Caleb and Adam. It's told from both of their perspectives. Caleb is an atypical who's an extreme empath, so he feels the feelings of everyone around him and is dealing with that ability while in high school. And in the process of getting to know his ability and how it functions, he falls in love with this fellow classmate of his, Adam, who has depression. It's a love story between the two of them. And there's also a lot of therapy in it because all of these atypicals go to therapy with Dr. Bright, hence the Bright sessions. And then my second book, A Neon Darkness, is, as Isa mentioned, about the villain of the series and how he became who he became with his emotional manipulation ability that he has to impose his desires onto other people.
Yeah.
And that book is really an exploration of someone who really desperately needs to go to therapy and hasn't yet. So it's a little bit darker, not quite the fluffy love story in Infinite Noises, but I'm really excited for people to read it.
Awesome.
How about you, Mark?
So my first book is Anger is a Gift, and Anger is a Gift is about a group of teenagers in West Oakland who stage a walkout protest when one of their friends is injured by a newly installed metal detector. Like TJ, I wanted to write about myself in that really weird way that we authors do sometimes, because we didn't see something that we needed when we were younger. And it remains like a focus of what I continue to write about. I have PTSD and trauma related from police brutality. And I've had depression and anxiety since I was about 8 or 9 years old. And so I had seen books where they dealt with one of those things, but the thing with mental illness is a lot of times we have multiple things going on at the same time, and they sort of they're comorbid, they exist and thrive off one another. And I wanted to write about an experience where someone wasn't just one thing, they were multiple things. So the main character of this book is heavily based on my experience with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And then with Each of Us a Desert, and I actually did not write this question, and now I'm like, I really want all of us to talk about how do you do fantasy, but then also do mental illness, especially if you're doing fantasy where our world doesn't exist and you can't. So, because that's one of the things I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about isolation, and specifically for queer people and how isolation affects our mental health. And it's about a young girl who is basically trapped in the village she grew up in because she's the only one with this magical power to basically save the people around her. And how that starts wearing down on her. And what does it feel like when you feel like there is a big world out there that you want to go live in, but for whatever reason, you can't actually leave? So I think mental health is always going to play a huge part in what I write, which I feel is a great segue to the actual question I want to ask. Because here's the thing, the three of us, and I don't think I am wrong about this, I think we are all very intentional about what we're putting in books. I think we think very hard about how we're representing not just mental illness, but gender, sexuality, race. So I wanted to know, how do you deal with this sort of weight and responsibility that comes with representing what is often a very badly represented topic in fiction? And especially when it's like, sometimes, it's impossible to represent a single story. All of these things that we were talking about, these different types of mental illness, manifest differently from person to person. So how do you deal with that? What was your approach with your own work? How have you dealt with that with feedback from work that's already been out there? Deep questions, let's go.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really a mix of letting go and leaning on the right people. And the letting go part is really about making sure that you are not trying to take on everything and every possible iteration of the character you're trying to represent and the thing you're trying to represent. And just understanding that you're never going to be everything for everybody, and that that's okay. And that it's more about, to me, about creating a character who feels real and grounded in whatever their experience is, rather than trying to say, oh no, this is the be-all and end-all representation of panic attacks. So this is the be-all and end-all representation of, demisexuality or whatever it is. And then in terms of leaning on the right people, throughout the course of doing my podcast and then writing the books, my sister is a professional psychologist, and it doesn't practice therapy. I work with humanitarian aid, but I had her, look at all of the ways that I was representing therapy and mental health, especially mental illnesses that were not my own, and getting her professional expertise and really walking that line between like, okay, yes, I know a therapist wouldn't necessarily behave this way, but it's science fiction. I need her to be like a little bit shady for plot reasons. Yeah. But making sure that the thing that was coming out at the end of the day was something that was going to be an advocate for therapy and for mental health, destroying mental health stigma. Right. And also make people feel seen, even if it was, I took creative liberties here and there about how things actually worked, always presenting like a positive message. And then of course, relying on sensitivity readers for your books is something that I especially for Neon Darkness, there were lots of identities and characters that I don't have and haven't experienced personally. And so having sensitivity readers on that to rely on, and then also understanding that they are not the be all and end all representation of their identities, and kind of just accepting that and hoping that your readers accept that too.
Yeah.
There is, going back to your question about the weight of it and the responsibility that comes with representing certain types of mental health or mental health issues. It's something that I used to wrestle with a lot because I wanted to be, like you said, you can't be everything for everyone because everyone is different. But when I was first starting out years and years ago, I wanted to be that for everyone because I figured, I know how I feel. I know how things hit me, and I want it to be universal. I want it to be that other people can see what I'm going through, because if they can see what I'm going through, maybe they can understand me better than I can ever, talk about anything like that. But that's not how the world works. That's not how we are. We are all obviously very, very different. So what is something that I go through with ADHD or depression or anxiety, anything like that, it's not going to be something that a person next to me will be going through that has the same diagnoses, but it's going to hit them completely differently. And so I had to step back and focus and think, especially when it comes to writing a character like Nick with ADHD in the Extraordinaries. I need to make sure that when I'm doing this, I'm not trying to be that something for everyone, because that's not fair to me as a person, and that's not fair to anybody else out there that's going through, whatever they're going through. Right. So I focused very, very closely on what it was like for me being 16 years old, being queer, being having ADHD, and on top of having depression, and on top of having anxiety, and dealing with being queer too. On top of that, living in a very rural place in Oregon wasn't conducive to a good outcome, at least that I had at that point. So I was able to move beyond that. I was able to escape that whole situation. And so when I sat down to write this book, or when I sit down to write characters that deal with some of the issues that I go through, I look back on who I was as a kid and what I had to go through. And knowing that while it may not be a universal experience to everyone out there, there are going to be people out there who will see certain parts of themselves in what I'm writing about. And even if they can't understand it as a whole, there's always going to be that little part of themselves, that when they see something that they recognize, they're like, that is me. That is part of me. That is what I want.
Do the two of you, I'm also curious then, when you're having your initial ideas, is your chance to address mental, is that part of the initial idea too, or is it something that actually comes later? Like when because I was interested because Lauren, when you were mentioning like, oh, I have panic attacks, and then I imagine, because I wish I time traveled. Like, look, I've been at panic attacks for years. Like, wouldn't that be great? You're just like, oh man, I could just go back and redo this. But was that initially part of it? Like, I want to write about this specific thing, or did you get the idea and then later you're like, oh, this is a way for me to talk about mental health? Do you see your ideas as a vehicle for it, or is it actually part of the original inspiration?
I think for me, it's a mix of both. I think that definitely with the panic attacks, that was something that I was going through a particularly bad period of depression and anxiety, and experiencing panic attacks a lot. And it was just a way for me to kind of have a thought experiment about these things that were so familiar to me by this point, that, helped me kind of get through them by thinking about what would happen if I was actually back in 1920s New York, observing, the life there. And then for everything else, it's really, I don't like to necessarily step into my own stories with an agenda in mind of what message I want to send. And I'm sure that you both get this too, of people accusing you of, like, oh, like you're a liberal queer agenda. And it's like, no, I am here and write about your queer.
Yeah, on Twitter, somebody accused me of writing Satan books. And I was like, oh, okay.
Of writing what?
Satanic books. Because they had queer characters in them. So I was writing for Satan. And I said, you know what? If Satan's okay with gay people, then whatever, it's totally fine.
Right? Yeah.
Now,
I mean,
now I kind of want to write a satanic book.
yeah.
I feel like not cornered at all. Like, why Satan? Oh boy, we're all gonna get fired. Okay, anyway, but yeah, I get what
The
you're
entire
saying
tour team is watching this going,
there.
no,
They're just like,
no,
please stop talking.
now they're talking about Satan.
Yeah, we're great. But I like what you said about that, Lauren, too, of like, I think sometimes we want to write good stories with characters who feel real. And for some people, that's a message in and of itself. They can't divorce it. They're just like, oh, you're trying to shove this down my throat, you know, and it's like, but no, that's just who this character is. And this is the world, you know. I mean, I'm wondering if you want to talk about that too, TJ.
Well, it's the fact that, you know, I think that especially when you're looking at kind of like the books that we write, the queerness is going to be at the forefront because let's be honest, we wear that part of ourselves proudly. Yeah. And, you know, there's always going to be the people that don't understand that. There's always going to be the people that say you're shoving this down our throat. But what I don't always understand is that when you're say you're a kid, you know, or you see children and everybody's thinking, oh, think of the children. You need to protect the children. But then they're all like, oh, look at this little boyfriend with his little girlfriend and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know, they can focus on the queer aspect of it because the queer aspect of it is what they're going to have a problem with. But that's not, and I won't speak for either of you, but I assume it's probably saying that when we write queer characters, they're not just queer. That is a facet of them that's part of them. Yeah. And much like any kind of mental health issues or struggles that they go with, it's part of them, but it doesn't define them. And if there is a definition of it in their life, if part of it does define them, it's something that they can hopefully are working through the narrative arc. And that's what you're trying to leave. We don't, at least I don't. And from what you two said, we don't go into start writing a book going, oh, this is going to be my agenda. This is what I need to do. Here's my bullet points that I need to go through to list everything that I want to talk about. That's going to be like, you know, that's not how narrative should work first and foremost, but that's not how we can do it.
There's do it either.
That's a laundry list of things that just kills creativity, man. It's just, you know, sometimes I want to write just to write. I don't need to write with an agenda or a message in mind. And if one comes out through the narrative, then cool. That's all more for it.
And then it's just about being mindful of those things. And I would be so curious, Mark, to hear your answer to your own question of the
that's not allowed
responsibility of too bad of representation, because especially with anger as a gift, I mean, I think I would imagine you've gotten lots of people sort of pointing to it as an agenda piece, even though it's just a beautiful narrative and it has a lot to say. But I'm so curious about your view on how you approach so many difficult topics.
I mean, I think it's interesting because sometimes it's the queerness. And it was just recently, I did a school visit the other day it's almost never the kids who are interacting with the book who have issues with it. They might have questions. They may not understand something. Like they may not understand the trans character, or they might not understand the non-binary character using they, them, but they ask questions. And generally it's adults who have problems with stuff like this. But yeah.
Adults suck.
Yeah, adults are the worst. Who cares about adults? We don't care. I think with mental illness specifically, you know, I felt an immense weight, but I think part of the weight came from, I knew if I was going to do this right, and what I mean by right is as honestly as possible, it meant that I was going to have to be super vulnerable. And I think that was my fear before the book came out, is I have put so much of my own experience with panic attacks, how they relate to police brutality, and so much with depression and anxiety, that what if someone's response to it is, this is bad representation, this is not how this works, and you're like, but I just gave you my whole life. Like, how can you, you know, and like clockwork, it happened a lot the first few months it came out. People saying like, this is horrible representation. No one who has PTSD would write this. No one who has depression or anxiety would write this. And I'm just like, I don't know, you know. And so I think I love what you said, Lauren, which is the sense of letting it go. Because at the end of the day, I certainly, like you, had sensitivity readers, multiple sensitivity readers for this book. I did the best that I can do, but like, you can't have a book that's going to represent everyone. And to people who claim that the way it talks about anxiety is wrong, I'm like, it's probably wrong for you. This is not how it works.
Well,
for
how
you.
do you react? How do you react to people like that? What do you, when somebody says what you're doing is wrong because it's not how I experienced it? What do you say to something like that? Do you say, well, everybody's different and your concerns are valid, but it's not.
Yeah.
So what do you do with something like that?
I think so. It happened to me at BookCon last year. Actually, at BookCon, someone came up to me and was like, "I like
public, face to face,
face to face." This was not like
I just got chills. Flop sweat.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like Goodreads, which I don't visit at all for any reason.
You don't do that.
Someone came to a book signing to get their book signed, and then immediately was just like, I don't like his anxiety. I don't think it's accurate. And I was like, what's your name?
First and foremost, the gall to say something like that to an author.
But I was just like, what do you mean by that? And they were just like, well, I just don't like the way, certain things make him nervous. And it was just all this, basically how they communicated it to me was I have anxiety. Here's how it manifests. And your experience is so different that I can't possibly believe it's real. And I was like, I don't really have a defense for that. There's no defense in the world because everything I put on the page is how it works for me. So I'm telling you that this is how my anxiety manifests. And for me, for example, for everyone watching, mine is the unknown. Anything I don't know for certain is how I spiral. And so I put that into the book. When this character is dealing with a situation where they feel helpless, where they're out of control and they don't know how to solve it, they start spiraling. And it's always this avalanche. It starts small and then it rolls and gets bigger and bigger. And that's how my anxiety manifests and what I work on every week in therapy. And so I explained it to them. That's how it works for me. And they were just, their response literally was, oh, I just never thought of it that way. I'm like,
well, that's good though. That's good that you were.
And when they, I was like, that's all I wanted. I just wanted you to think oh, there's another way that this works. It's.
Well, and I think
very strange.
I think that's it's in the title of this event, right? Like empathy over stigma. That's all that we're actually trying to do is just to present a story and a character to someone that is real in their own world and is real to us in the hopes that it will, at the very least, lead to conversations like that, where you can have a dialogue this is what's wonderful about teens, right? Is that they do ask those questions and hopefully are making efforts to understand. But it's, there are certain other times where you just have to be like, sorry, you didn't like it.
Okay, well,
read this book.
Let's segue then a little bit into the question that I had, because I think it's a good follow-up for this, where we're going. So for myself, when I write specific characters, I tend to stick with something that I am well versed in: depression, anxiety, panic attacks, being neurodiverse. I'm a whole host of issues, man, let me tell you. But I know what those issues entail because they're a part of my daily life and have been since, I can remember having panic attacks when I was 7-8 years old, and now understanding why I couldn't breathe. And it made it even worse when the people were around me. Because, when you're in the grips of a panic attack, the worst possible thing someone could do is get in your face and tell you to breathe through it. And as long as you can breathe through it, you'll be fine. Yeah. They don't understand the stifling way it feels, that like you're drowning and you can't get your head above water. But with that understanding that experiences aren't universal, and that aside from what we've talked about, there are other mental health issues that people struggle with. So how do you branch, if you're writing these kind of characters, do you write only what you know, or do you branch out into other forms of mental health? And if so, how do you prepare in writing something that you might not be familiar with, keeping in mind that we've already kind of discussed sensitivity readers a little bit, but before it even gets to the sensitivity reader, what do you do in order to make sure that while it may not be universal, that the experience you're writing about is at least authentic?
Yeah. Oh boy. So generally speaking, I think I've also done what you've done, TJ. When I look at, the 3 or 4 novels I've written and the short stories that address mental health, almost all of them in some way or another, I can't think of any of them where I deviated from something that I have experienced. I think it is comfortable. It's familiar. There's something where I feel like even if the rest of the story is not familiar, I can root it in this place of this thing is very personal, and I know I know what I'm doing. That doesn't mean I don't do research or talk to other people, but I'm currently working on a manuscript where I'm dealing with something I don't think I really have experience with. I feel like I have tangential experience, but it's not direct. And I'm writing a book about someone who is in a cult and doesn't know it.
Yeah, I was going to say if you had experience with that, that's all.
I have slight experience where I think my mom wanted to form a cult, but we didn't really get there. Like, it was a whole weird thing. My mom is a very interesting person. But I don't feel like I have like the lived experience of like multiple years in something. And so what does that mindset look like? How does a person think as the facade begins to crack? And how do you do that without being cruel to the person experiencing it? Because my big thing is I don't want to write something that's cruel. I don't want to write something that makes a person who's been through this experience feel like, oh, you're making fun of me. This thing, you're writing this to be titillating. It's, you know, you're thinking of me as some exotic, weird. I don't. I want it to feel very personal. And so what I'm doing is reading nonfiction and fiction books on the subject. So, you know, I read Kim Liggett's first novel. Boy, I'm so excited to read Courtney Summers' new book. I haven't read it yet, obviously, but like I've read some fiction that came highly recommended, but then also to read nonfiction, knowing that I'm not going to take everything from the nonfiction books and put it into my book, but just sort of get a sense of like, here are things from an academic standpoint, here are things from a narrative nonfiction standpoint where someone who was in a cult is written about what the experience was like. And then I have some video interviews next month with a couple friends who were in cults as kids, who are just like, I was like, I'm going to send you a bunch of money for sitting down with me for a couple hours. And I would recommend that if you're going to do that kind of research, pay people if they're willing to.
Yeah.
Because I did research for my last book where one of my friends was like, I don't want you to give me money, but take me out to this bougie restaurant. I was like, okay, I'll do that. For like, value their time, because what they're doing could be very traumatic. Or not could be, it probably is going to be very traumatic. So I think it's a combination of research from third party, first person, and then also just talk to people. Even with mental health stuff I go through, I still talk to my friends like, hey, I'm writing this scene about having a panic. Do you want to read this thing over real quick? Or like, let me just talk something out with them. Is just at the end of the day, and it really goes to the theme of this panel, like empathy over stigma. How can I make this person seem like a whole person, even if they're flawed, even if the world is flawed, even if they are messy, if they make bad decisions? Because like, I'm sure the three of us have made some very messy, bad decisions because of our mental illness. And I want to write about that, but I don't want it to slip over into the stigma of all people who have mental illness make bad decisions, like, which is, it can happen so easily.
Absolutely. I think the first person research is so critical. I have also tended to root the bulk of my stories in that, you know, myriad of various mental health issues and identities that I have. But one of the supporting characters who got his entire own episode in the Bright Sessions was a veteran of the Afghanistan War. And I have never been in a war zone. And I, you know, have a lot of very complicated feelings about the American military and whatnot. Yeah. But I just did a lot of reading and watching documentaries and interviews, and not just from, you know, Afghanistan and Iraq, but from Vietnam and from sort of throughout the years, because the conversation around it has changed so much. And the result of it was really interesting, because he's a Marine, and I got a lot of emails from currently serving Marines who somehow found this queer science fiction podcast. Genuinely
day for day,
like saw themselves reflected in like a couple of, you know, like factual things here and there where it's like, oh, actually the way that this works is like this, and just stuff that like never came up in my research. But the heart of the character still resonated with them, I think, because I was trying to approach it with as much empathy as possible,
right?
Despite my complicated feelings about that war and you know, and about the military in general. I loved that character, and I wanted to give him a way to tell his story with the most empathy possible, which was something else that in writing, you know, kind of a villain origin story within Neon Darkness, Damien is a very complicated character who manipulates a lot of people. He doesn't, the way that his ability works strips away people's consent often. And writing him with the most empathy possible and trying to understand aspects of him, despite the fact that I disagree with almost everything that he does, was really important. Like, I think that even though his identity and mental health, resume is very different from my own, the thing that I always try to do with any character is find the thing that we share and find the thing that I have in common with them as a way in to kind of getting to know that person. And so for him, he's an incredibly lonely person who has a really hard time connecting with people, which was something that I really had a hard time with when I was his age and still have a hard time with now. And so I think just both that research is so important, and then also trying to find the ways in which you connect with that person. And if they were a real person that you met in real life, like trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and treat them with as much empathy as possible. And I think that, as a result, writing has made me a more empathetic person, just because I try to approach everybody, even if their first impression is like very, very bad. Like I try to approach everybody in that way. How about you, TJ? Oh, sorry.
Actually, real quick, TJ, before you answer your own question, because you have to now too, since Lauren established this.
Damn it.
I think it's interesting you brought up specifically PTSD with a veteran, because now I'm thinking like I have like, I'm going to get this is my therapy session for the day, I guess. But like my 3 roots for PTSD are child abuse, sexual assault, and police brutality. But in thinking how my PTSD manifests for each 3, they're so different. So even though I have experience with PTSD, I don't feel like I could write effectively about a veteran who has PTSD, someone being in an active war zone. I don't think I could write a character who is living in a colonized country and what that PTSD feels like. I don't feel like I would be. That is something where I'm like, I have to do way more research. I can't rely on what I know. And
but could you find yourself getting to that point though? Even if maybe you've never lived there, is there a point where you can do as so much research that you feel comfortable in order to be able to tell the kind of story you want to tell?
Sure.
Because there's a fine line you have to walk, because if you're not doing it correctly, it's going to look like you're just basically checking off boxes and making a laundry list of, oh, this happened to this person, so these are the kind of characteristics that fall within. And people will pick up on that very quickly. They're able to tell when an author is writing about something that they have no idea what they're talking about, and it shows very clearly.
I mean, I think the awareness is the hardest part. And I think it's when an author gets too comfortable in assuming that they know everything, and they don't have that awareness that's like, is this actually what I should be doing? Is this actually what I should be putting down on the page? Am I thinking of this in the greater scheme of how is this going to look to someone else? And I think, like Lauren said, I think that's why it helps to have outside people, because at the end of the day, like we as authors can get so inside of our own stories, we can't actually see the forest for the trees, Yeah. And so I think even if I got comfortable, and I think I will get comfortable enough to write a different manifestation of something I've dealt with, I think I would still want to involve other people as a way to like keep it closer to something authentic. I don't know that I'd ever reach the 100% authenticity.
There's times I don't even feel comfortable or feel like I have 100% authenticity when I'm writing about what I'm going through, because it's something that can fluctuate and change. And my big thing is that when I don't understand something, I tend to hyperfixate, and I want to read and learn everything I possibly can about it. And I would never ever call myself an expert in the situations that I'm trying to learn about, but I have to have an understanding. I have to be able to read until it makes sense to me, and to talk to people that are going through what I'm talking or what I'm trying to learn until it actually makes sense to me, until there's that moment in my brain when it clicks. And then all of a sudden, while I can't necessarily and won't say that I understand what somebody is going through because of something that I've never gone through, at the very least, I can hope that I can have a better idea of what it does to them or what they're going through as an individual. Because you never want to put a blanket like ADHD. You never want to put that and think every person with ADHD is exactly the same, because we're not.
Right.
If you put us all together in a group, sure, you're probably going to have a billion people talking all at once, all at the same time, and not getting anything done. But each of us has, like with depression or with anxiety, panic attacks, it hits everybody different. My panic attack is not going to be the same as your panic attack, even though on the edges there are probably going to be some similarities, but it's when you start getting into like the micro level of it all and looking inward, you're going to see that it's so completely different for how it hits us, and how you resolve it may not be how I resolve it. And if somebody sees the way I work through it, they probably think, well, that's not what I would do. And there might be a chance that the connection is a little lost because they won't be able to put themselves into the same position. And I try to, as you said, writing has taught me empathy to a point, because there's times when I think that I didn't necessarily consider every single piece and every single part like we have to, because when you're writing a narrative and you're writing a novel, you have to think of all the moving parts, and that translates to your daily life because you have to think of all the moving parts, because that's just how our brains work.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about getting lost in your work and in our own worlds, and Mark, to your point earlier about the terrifying vulnerability that comes with putting some of the stuff to the page, I want to pose my question to you both, which is, how do you take care of your own mental health when you're just immersed in this stuff all day, every day, which I think, is a particularly topical question given everything that's going on.
Well, especially now when we're all in quarantine, and going back to the very beginning when Mark was talking about queer people isolating themselves, this is a big issue that we're all going through right now. It's funny when we talk about how experiences aren't universal, but this is something that we're all going through right now. This is something that we can all understand because it's hitting us all at once. For me, my big thing, and this is something that took me weeks to get used to, because I go to therapy. Therapy has been a part of my life for many, many years, and it's important to me that I continue to go to therapy. I think of it like it's like when somebody wants to go to the doctor, and not necessarily because something's wrong, because they want to get a checkup. That's how it is for my brain. I need a tune-up in my head. Doesn't necessarily need to be that something bad happened the week before or something made me mad or sad or upset. I just need to sometimes get stuff off my chest and talk to my therapist. So when all this pandemic stuff started happening, I didn't know what I was going to do, because there's something about sitting in my therapist's office and being able to talk to them face to face. The connection there that I didn't know if would translate, especially when states around me, I'm in Virginia, states around us started going into lockdown. And then back in March, they announced that we're in lockdown until sometime in June. So we've been all self-isolating for months now. And so my therapist said, we can video chat, we can talk on the phone, you can text me if you need to at any point. So we started, I didn't want to do like a video chat because I don't know, there was something that felt a little weird about that. But I've been my therapy sessions are now done over the phone. And there's something very, very relaxing about that, because when you're not necessarily, therapists obviously are trained that their facial expressions are carefully blank and that what you tell them they don't react to. So, but there's something even better now that I don't have to see their face when I'm telling them, these are all my problems. This is what's going on with me. This is why I'm sad today. And they, for all I know, he could be rolling his eyes, but I don't have to worry about that because I don't see their face. And the therapy I struggled with it at first, continuing, because I was like, well, if I don't have to leave my house, why do I need to go and call my therapist? But something that we have to do is that it is like getting a tune-up. You have to keep on doing it, because the moment you lapse, the moment you start pushing it off, it's going to become easier until you're so frazzled and completely negating all the work that you've done to lead up to that point. So we have to, especially now more than ever, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to learn how to be kinder to ourselves too, because I don't know about you guys, but I can be my own worst critic. I can be downright, especially when it comes to my writing career, I can be downright mean to myself. And I have to learn to stop doing that. And especially now, because, it's only going to make things worse. We all have so much bigger things to worry about than our brains betraying us, essentially.
And touching on that, my therapist, because I am also in therapy. Therapy's wonderful.
Hooray, therapy
I love it
buddies.
so much. I love it. She said one of the coolest things to me in one of our earlier sessions, which was that one of her jobs is to point out when you're, and she's like, you're a writer, you'll understand this, when you're being an unreliable narrator. And when you have depression, when you have anxiety, you become your worst narrator for yourself. And your version of the world that you see, it's not that it's wrong, it's flawed. There are things that you can't see because you're seeing it through your eyes and your experience. And then on top of it, you've got all the stuff going on in your brain where you could have any million of things that are going wrong. So to answer your question, like therapy, yes, therapy is a huge, huge help. But admittedly, I was not good at this, at self-care, when writing about hard, difficult topics. I was not in therapy for the entirety of writing Anger is a Gift. I didn't get into it until I started writing my second book. And so I've had this conversation with some of my writer friends. I'm going to highly, highly recommend my friend Tiffany Jackson and her books. She also writes about very difficult, traumatic, triggering things. And we've had conversations about what do you do? What do you do when you're writing and you're going to this very dark place? And I have a whole process now where I have friends, hey, I'm going to do writing today. I have to write about something really difficult. Is it okay if I text you later? Then I do it. And when I put on whatever music I need to do. I write the thing that's difficult. And then I don't do anything with that project until I have at least spoken to a therapist, spoken to a friend, and had some just completely non-work related me time, playing a video game, going off to do something else, go for a walk. And part of it is you need to come down from the actual act of writing it. I mean, there's stuff in Anger is a Gift that I wrote and put in this book that I've never told a person ever. Like experiences of dealing with PTSD and whatnot, and I just never said it out loud. And yeah, so that's my big recommendation. Make sure you're, like TJ said, being kind to yourself.
Most readers that are probably watching this don't understand that writing for us, at least for me, is you're basically writing a diary a little bit. you're essentially putting everything out on the paper, and so it's when I can't imagine, like Mark, when that person came up to you at that book convention and said that to your face, I'd be like, ow, my heart. Also, screw you, but also my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things that you don't say to anybody that then you're like, oh, say this to thousands of people. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and especially when a book is like going, and here's like a follow-up thing. How do you deal with when your book goes into your editor and your editor's reading through your book, keeping in mind that our editors are probably watching right now. But what if they don't understand something that you're trying to get across, especially when it is your own personal truth? Do you push back? Do you hey?
I live for those moments because
me too. I haven't had that many though.
My editor so much, and not just because she maybe is watching this, but the thing that's incredible about Allie is that she will.
Me too. She's mine too.
She's definitely watching because she.
Yeah, I know she. Yeah.
Sorry. Hi, Allie. I love you.
Hi, Allie.
Yeah. You're responsible for all of us.
The thing that's amazing about Allie is that she always gives me the benefit of the doubt that like what I have to say in something is worthwhile and should be in the story. And then sometimes we go through the editing process. It's like no. Actually, that's just indulgent. Like, get rid of that.
Right? That happens. Something I'll fight for in one edit, then all of a sudden the next one I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
Why did I fight so hard for this? It's not good. But I think what's really nice to me about those moments is that I'll put in something that is really significant to me and something I'm trying to express, and she'll come back and say, I don't think this is quite hitting, or I'm not quite understanding it. But the core of it is she always understands and gives the benefit of the doubt to, that then that's the opportunity for me to become a better writer, because I have to find a way to express myself differently. And it just makes me a better writer. So I love those moments.
See, I don't think people that are watching this can understand how important it is to have an empathetic editor too, because man, if somebody was so coldly clinical and trying to edit my work, we would not mesh well at all. And it would be book would suffer because of that. Not saying that, when my editor is giving me edits, they're doing it for a reason and obviously to make the book better. But the reason that we can be successful like we are is because we have a team behind us that is empathetic too. And it's not just, our faces, it's a bunch of people behind us that are working and believing in the same thing that we do. And they're helping us to tell our stories better.
I feel very lucky. My editor at Tortine is Miriam Weinberg. I've known Miriam for years. We have a lot of shared experiences. I actually had none of the issue of like anything I was putting into Anger is a Gift or Each of Us a Desert in terms of like personal experience. If it didn't make sense for the story, she would absolutely point it out. Like, I can tell this is very personal, but this doesn't make any sense, Mark. I feel very spoiled though, because I did a project where I was edited by someone else who was the cold clinical type. And it was
I've had that before.
Awful.
Awful.
I could not believe how contentious everything was. We constantly disagreed. At one point they were like, I'm trying to edit you because you wrote a YA story. And I was like, you hired a young adult author. Why are you just telling me now 3 drafts in you didn't want a young adult story? Like, why is
it's messed up? Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a nightmare.
Well, see,
but it made me very thankful for. No, you can't. Like, you're struggling, and like I also have the privilege of knowing Allie, and I think what's great about our editors is that they do this thing where when they're editing us, it's always about opening a door and then expecting us to walk through, where they don't tell us the answer. They're not like, this is how you need to do this, and this is the solution to it. They're like, I think this isn't working. Maybe rethink this, and we have to come up with the ideas ourselves. And I find that so much more like intellectually stimulating and creatively interesting, instead of the cold and calculating where like, this editor was fully rewriting my sentences, and I was like, "Do you want to write this?" Like, no. We're not going to do this. So anyway,
your book will never be what you want it to be in a situation like that, because I mean, obviously that person did not understand your story at all, and probably should have had no business trying to edit it. But I just want the people watching to understand that when you read our books, and if they make you feel something, that help you learn something new. Yes, it's our voice, but there are people behind us that are helping us to refine our voices and
absolutely
get our message across maybe a little bit clearer than it would have been had you just allowed us just to sit there and type all the words that we want to type.
Yeah. We should go to audience questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have time.
All right, perfect. You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. So we're going to start with questions that we got through our @Tortine social channels for this event. So first question actually has to do with therapy, which you guys were touching on earlier. Question is, there are still people who have a negative outlook on therapy. Do you think a positive representation of therapy in YA books can help change that?
Oh.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I hope, especially if it's teenagers reading the book that may not be getting what they need from parental figures in their lives. If they have somebody telling them in their home or at school, or I hope not at school, but if they do, and have somebody tell them that therapy is, it's for the crazy people, it's blah, blah, blah. That is not, that's not something that they're gonna think about in a positive light. But if they're reading about it in a book and they're seeing it, what a character is going through that might be similar to them, and there's actually a good therapy going on in the book, and they're actually working through it, then I hope it can be beneficial. I hope that it shows them that there are other things out there than what they're learning. Because when you think about it, when you're 15, 16 years old, everything is ramped up to an 11. Everything, you're hormonal, everything is just, you're basically, you've never been more vulnerable than you are when you're around that age. And you kind of have to sometimes, at least for me, I had to unlearn some things that I had been taught. And for a long time, I did not, I was somebody who thought that therapy was not for me. I didn't need to go pay to somebody to talk about my problems. That's weird, but I forced myself to go because I was not getting better on my own. I was not getting better
Yeah.
on my own. As a matter of fact, I was reaching a point where it would not be possible for me to get better on my own. So that first step in asking for help is the hardest thing a person
Yep.
can do when they're in this kind of situation.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's that first step is a doozy, man. It is a doozy, and but if you can work up that courage, if you can trust in yourself and believe in yourself to know that you need to ask for help, then once you do, man, all the rest is easier than you ever think possible.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get over that initial mountain, that impossible mountain that you don't think you can ever get across, I promise you, it is so much better after that, even if it doesn't seem like it right away. You have to have patience in yourself. You have to.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the things that I love about media and about YA specifically, is that I think that can help be that first step. I mean, I love this question because I know the answer to it is yes, it can have an effect, because I've had people who've said that Infinite Noise or the podcast got them to go to therapy. Like, and I don't say that to be like, oh, look at me, like I help someone go to therapy, but that sometimes it's so much easier if you're 15 and you're dealing with something you don't understand, but you know enough and you're comfortable enough with yourself to recognize wanting help, to be able to show your parents a book or a TV show or a movie or, you know, an album or something of your favorite songwriter who's talked about their experiences openly, and say, hey, so like, I really love this thing, and one of the things that's interesting about it is therapy, and it can be this nice lower stakes way to have that conversation versus just, you know, entering that conversation out of the blue. Or that's how it can feel to people, to be able to sort of like couch it in a conversation about media that I think can be a nice stepping stone.
I think it's also, you know, I have my main character goes to therapy. There are no therapy sessions on the page. And that was very intentional too, because I liked the idea that everyone in my main character's life talked about him going to therapy, and it was never a joke, and it was never like, ew, you go to therapy. It was just, to borrow, like someone in the chat, Angela said, like what you do, TJ, is normalizing therapy, normalizing it. This is just what people do.
That is the best thing you can do for someone, is to normalize therapy, because regardless of what you think, we all need it. We all need it. Everyone.
And I also had another reason for doing it, which is that, you know, I'm Latino in immigrant communities, and a lot of, you know, communities where most of the people in are people of color. We have a huge stigma with mental illness. We have a huge stigma with therapy. Some of it is based on generational trauma. There is a reason we don't trust doctors, because they have historically treated us terribly. So there's an extra hurdle to get over. And so in writing Anger is a Gift, given that the entire main cast is people of color, I wanted to just have this moment where it's, you know, there's a scene where it's the two of them on the bus, like the mom and the main character go on the bus going to therapy, and they're just going. That's just what they do. Oh, once a week we get on a bus, we go to therapy. Mom sits out in the office. I talk to someone, like, and that's a normal thing. And they don't have to talk about what they talked in the sessions, like, and just presenting it as this is part of this person's everyday life, and it doesn't feel like a field trip or an after school special. I think that is stuff that can do more to change people's perception of therapy than not having it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Another question that came through social. What are some things that you do to help you cope with quote unquote bad mental health days / episodes?
Oh, I one thing I do not do anymore, because I used to do this, and it was something that I think that hurt me in the long run, is I don't allow myself to just crawl into bed and pull the covers up and over my head and not do anything about it. Because I've found, at least for me, and obviously this isn't going to work for everybody, but for me, when I become inactive, when I let something like that take over me, I let myself get mired in it. I let myself focus on it. And when I'm not doing something, I am thinking about every little slight that's been against me or that I've done against somebody else, and then it just compounds the problem. So for me, I mean, it's something as simple as grabbing my dog and walking for hours and just to clear my head. And usually by the time I get back to my house, I'm in a much better place. I prefer silence and solitude, just because my head my brain is always moving at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and I have just thoughts and thoughts and thoughts, and it always is, my brain is always on. And I need moments where I can just walk away. I can just walk away, get out and clear my head. And that is how I deal with it for myself. And again, that's not going to work for everyone. I'm sure there's going to be people that have the ways that they cope, but that is my coping method because it works for me. But I don't let myself, not anymore. I don't let myself sink below the surface and stay there, because I am the person watching out for me. So therefore I need to take care of myself, because I can't always rely on everybody else to do it. You have to take some ownership to what you're going through. And again, it could just be as simple as that first step of asking for help. Yeah.
I think the point about not like wallowing in it is something that I also had to learn
and that's a lot harder than some people think.
It is. And it's, I think that, for a while I was like, oh, well, by acknowledging it and giving myself a break, I'm actually being kind to myself. And it's like, well, no, because you're not giving yourself a break, right? You're just sinking further into this thing.
Right.
And so I think I've found a way to actually genuinely give myself a break. And that I think on days where that mountain, like where I can sort of see the top of the mountain, as it were, like I will, try to get outside. I'll try to actually like exercise. I will kind of allow myself, I'll treat myself kindly in the sense that I'll be like, you know what, you're not going to get any writing done today or any work done today. That's okay. But just like cook dinner or like do the dishes or, something that's like not work related, but that is still not just like sitting, and not doing anything. And then there are those days where like, like I'm not going to do the dishes and I'm not going to go outside.
Screw everything.
I can get to the top of the mountain, it's just a big like wall of rock in front of me. And I think on those days it's about like, and it's like still a process. So it's like, I don't go and lie in bed and watch Captain America, the Winter Soldier for 9 hours on repeat like I used to. Instead, like I watch it once on the
very
couch.
Specific.
I was like, that had to happen, right? That was a real thing. Yeah. All right.
So like now it's like I do it from the couch and I just like watch it. I think, and understanding too that like that's a stepping stone to hopefully find even better ways to cope. But I think the biggest thing that's helped me, other than I will also chime in for the yes, do therapy, betterhelp.com or pridecounseling.com are both great telemedicine for people who are quarantined. But also just being honest with my friends and family about what's going on with me. Like, because I a lot of my anxiety is rooted in I have terrible social anxiety. And so like friendships and interpersonal relationships can be really, really hard. And so if I'm having a particularly bad brain day and a friend texts me like something totally random and innocuous, sometimes that will send me into a spiral of like, oh my God, I haven't texted them in 2 days. I'm such a bad friend. And now like I have to respond to it's taking all of my effort to even just like, look at this text. I'm not gonna be able to respond to it. And sometimes I've just started being like, hey, like I'm having a super bad mental health day. Like I'm going to text you tomorrow. And like, it's hard and it's weird, but like
honesty is so important. It is so important.
It really is.
It's better just to be like, hey, I love you, but like I can't do this right now. Like that's something that helps me a lot. Even if it's literally like a friend just texts me a funny tweet, sometimes it's just gonna be
too much.
Better for me to just be like, turn it seriously immediately, being like, I'm having a bad day, I'll text you tomorrow.
Yeah. I love this question too, because now I get to like provide an example to everyone who is watching this about how things manifest in different ways, because both of those techniques don't work for me at all, because my problem is I don't know how to wallow. I don't sit and feel the thing I'm feeling. I just let it block up in my brain until I have 8,000 emotions I haven't talked about and I didn't tell anyone about, and I haven't dealt with any of them. So a lot of what me and my therapist are working on, she had me do. So here's the thing I've been doing, and it seems so obvious in hindsight. And when she gave it to me, it seemed so silly. I was like, no, this is not going to help. She gave me a spreadsheet split by 2 hours every day, and it's a mood chart, and I have to say what I'm feeling at any given moment. And I was like, why would I do that? This is not going to help. 2 days in, I was like, oh, I'm actually angry because I haven't eaten in 6 hours. Like just little things that I hadn't even thought of. Oh, I haven't been outside on a walk in 3 days. Maybe that's why I feel terrible all the time. Or if it is really something I'm going through, I have to get to the root of it. So my thing is that I historically have not been the kind of person who gets depressed, gets in bed, pulls the covers over my head, doesn't shower for 3 days. And so I actually have had people say, I don't believe that you're depressed because I've never seen it. And I'm like, oh no, I have a perpetual mask on at all times.
Yep.
Like I'm not depressed currently, but I can be this active and joyous and silly and just feel like death inside. Like, and I've gotten really good. It's a survival mechanism. So a lot of what I'm learning from my bad mental health days is how do I actually slow down? How do I sit in what I'm feeling and figure out what it is I'm going through instead of ignoring it? And on the honesty thing, I had a friend, bless their heart, last year was the end of last year was really hard for me. I lost someone super close to me. And one of the things that got really grating, and it's happening now in quarantine, is when someone's like, how are you? I'm like, motherfucker, how do you think I am? Like, world is terrible. Like, and how
the world is on fire. Can you not even see outside your door?
Right? And so they flipped it around. They're like, every time I talk to you, I'm going to ask you something different. Or I'm not going to ask, how are you? I'm going to ask, how's your heart today? And I was like, I like that. Because it doesn't mean, how are you? It's like, how are you today? Because then you can say, oh, I'm sad. I'm real sad today. Or I'm really angry. Today I feel light. Like, I feel like there's a way. I liked that because it made being honest easier.
Yeah.
Instead of, because how are you? I'm fine. It's okay. Well, we all know when someone says,
so easy to cop out.
That's
right.
not actually what's happening. Like,
see, what I liked about this show is I'm thinking that we can probably all say that we have to deal with depression, but you can see how differently it affects each of us, and each of us has our own ways of coping with it, which is why it's so important to understand that mental health, there's not some big umbrella that everything fits under. Right. There's a billion umbrellas and they're all spread out all over the place. And you have to understand that you're not, what you're going through may not be what somebody else is going through, and they may not understand, and that's okay as long as you can at least talk about it,
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we have a ton of people who ask this on social. Any book recommendations that have great mental health rep that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh, I do have one, but I can't remember the author. The book is called Leaving Myself Behind. And I'm blanking on the author's name right now. It's a YA book. It's a queer YA book about a teenager going. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because I can even picture the cover. Okay.
I can.
But the story revolves around a queer teenager whose mother is going through some very serious mental health traumas, and it's filtering down to him, and he's showing that he is going through some of the same things that she is, and he's beginning to understand her a lot better. And that book is lovely. It is one well written. Bart Yates, that's who I was wondering. And even better, there's a very, very sweet, slow burn queer romance that goes on in the periphery and the background. And it's not the main book. I just want everybody to know that the big part of the story has to deal with parental relationships and what you do when your parent is the one having the mental health crisis.
Wow. Yeah. I think similarly, like a great mental health book that has a lovely queer love story sort of happening in the background is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, which is just one of my favorite books of all time. It's just so good. It's so good. And it's just this beautiful contemplation about grief and family and sibling relationships. And I cannot recommend it more highly. I can't even say more about it because it's just, everyone has to read it.
I recommend this book 8 million times. I will recommend it 8 million more times, but it was on my bookshelf. But We Are Okay by Nina LaCour I genuinely think this is one of the most perfect books on the face of the planet.
Recommendation.
It's so good.
Nina LaCour, you need to.
Yes. By the way, I forgot that you were on this Issa still, and I was like,
they just scared me for a second. I was like, is Lauren screen lagging? What is going on?
I also recommend The Astonishing Color of After by my friend Emily Exarpan. It's fantastic. Oh boy, anything by Case and Calendar. Case and Calendar is just ruining all of our lives with some of the best fiction, and everything that they've written addresses some mental health topic in one way or another and does so beautifully and with empathy. So anything by Case and Calendar.
Also, At the Edge of the Universe by Sean David Hutchinson is like unbelievably unique and sort of spoke to a sort of mental state that I can't even really describe, but it's like a mystery romance, sci-fi, apocalyptic YA novel. Like
Yeah,
that's a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I mean, the perspective.
That's very Sean. It's very Sean too.
Yeah, the perspective of the main character is just such an interesting, unique, like representation of a specific sort of mental illness that I feel like we just don't see very much in fiction. So At the Edge of the Universe is fabulous.
And I can't stop. Real quick, also, Darius the Great is Not Okay and Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram are both deal with a character who has depression, and they're just perfect books. One of the only times I've ever read a sequel and being like, how are you? Your first book is perfect. I don't know how you can do a sequel, and then reading the sequel and be like, oh, that's how you do that. I'm so mad at you. It's so good.
That's the best.
Yeah, both. Darius the Great is Not Okay is not out for a few more months. Or no, Darius the Great is Not Okay is out now. The sequel, Darius the Great Deserves Better, is out later this year.
Nice.
Those are fantastic recommendations, guys. Okay, I'm going to move over to some questions from our attendees.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh, this is an interesting question. Do you believe that fiction romanticizes mental health problems? How do you keep such experiences real while showing they are bearable and people can still be happy, have relationships, etc.?
Oh, wow.
I have a lot of feelings about the romanticizing question, because that's something that I was very conscious of when writing Damien, because there is this trend. I'm a total fangirl. I've been in fandom for a really long time. TJ and the Extraordinaries, all the fanfic stuff was like so.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It really was.
I loved it. Just like even just opening it up and seeing that it began with a fanfic, I was like, oh my god.
Right.
Yeah. But there's this trend in fandom sometimes of like woobifying villains, especially villains who are coded male, white, and straight and cis. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to unpack that and sort of show why that person shouldn't be romanticized, but also give that person empathy. And I think it's just treating people like they're people. I think the moment that you start to be unable to imagine this person in the real world, that's when you start to veer into romanticizing. Or I think a good experiment for me is always imagining that person 30 years down the line. Mm. And if it's all kind of like hazy and soft around the edges, then I probably haven't fleshed them out enough, and they might be easily romanticized. And I think that instead being able to imagine someone, 30, 40 years down the line and understanding that they can be happy, and they can also have days where everything is annoying them and they're having a hard time. They can have that one really bad year, and just understanding that they're humans and that it's not necessarily, the book might be a happily ever after, but if you're imagining their entire life as a happily ever after, maybe, or as the reverse, as, just bad stuff from now until the end of time, they probably aren't fleshed out enough, and they'll be easy to romanticize. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it does, especially because when I was writing The Extraordinaries, I went very, very deep into fandom to understand why people wrote fan fiction like they did. Because when I was a kid, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I was writing fan fiction about Metroid, the video game, because I wanted to be part of that world. Amazing. And so when you're looking into fandom these days, first and foremost, there are obviously some extraordinarily gifted 16-year-old writers out there that I'm just like, how the hell do you write so good? When I was 16, everything was like, I purpled the hell out of prose, man. It was hardcore. but there, I was especially interested in what you said about them essentially making the straight white villain into this soft, cuddly puppy. Like, for example, when I was researching fandom, it was at the height of the first Star Wars Force Awakens movie, and Kylo Ren like tortured the characters, killed billions of people, but some people in fandom, and it's okay if you like him as a character, and I'm not judging you, but a lot of people in that fandom were like, oh, he's just so soft and so misunderstood, and he's coded to be this or he's coded to be that. I'm like, he just annihilated an entire fucking planet. Why are you doing this? But I know that, especially with like sites like fanfiction.net, Archive of Our Own, and those sites, I'm sure that there are plenty of people on there that were like I was when I was that age, and writing was a form of therapy. That was the only therapy that I knew. Okay. And so to be able to write, whatever's in their head, even if it meant following a straight white villain into making him to something that they're not, that's how they deal with it and stuff like that. Yeah. So I'm not going to judge too harshly, except he was basically Space Hitler. So.
Well, and there's a difference between, I think you can still, like, I love villain characters, and I love my villain characters, and I care about them and have empathy for them. And I think there's a difference between like looking at a character and wanting to see like, every layer of their life and want them to do better, and then erasing every bad thing they've ever done in the purpose of making them a romantic lead. It's like those two things are different. I think absolutely in fan fiction, like, do whatever you want. But I think when it comes to what creators who are being paid are putting out into the world, it's like, it's important to not.
We have a responsibility. The onus is on us to get it right. And if somebody doesn't like what we're right, that's totally fine. But if there are people out there actively putting out harmful things that could actually do harm to somebody that's reading it, that's when you have to draw the line and ask yourself some really serious questions about what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
I think, and I'm glad both of you went first, because I was sitting here thinking about like what actually counts as romanticizing, and like what's an example that I could think of, and it's taken me this whole time to think of an actual example.
I'll be right back.
And I'll use names, I don't care. But I think that there is a romanticizing of depression in New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. And I have had problems with the way depression is represented in there, not because it is unrealistic for time to pass very quickly. It is actually a very common thing for people. I experience it all the time too, where I'm like, how did all of the day go? Like, where did the whole day go? Wait, it's been 2 weeks? Oh, this depressive episode is so intense, I don't understand how time passed. That is actually a very real feature. The problem with how it's represented in the text is it's seen as if you devote yourself so fully to a person and develop depression when they leave, they will come back to you. And it is actually a noble thing to pine in this depressive episode for 4 months straight. And that's where I see romanticizing, where I also think, my theory personally is that Stephanie Meyer has never dealt with depression. I don't think she's ever gone through it on a clinical level, or if she has, like, I mean, that's the other difficult thing. Like, we could sit here and talk about it, but it's like, we don't always tell the truth about who we are in our fiction. Yeah. We don't always put all of ourselves in there. To me, the scene the scene and then what happens after it felt very hollow. And it felt hollow because it felt like this is the romantic thing to do, which is to devote yourself so fully to one person that you develop a depressive episode when they leave, and the only way to solve it is to get back with them. And I'm like, no, as someone who's also had depression when they got dumped, no, this is bad. Like, that's a bad thing to do. So I think that might be an example of how romanticizing happens. But I think one of the great things that's been happening is we have moved. I can't think of modern examples of romanticizing mental illness.
No, that's the one thing that we've done. We've moved beyond it. We have pushed forward. Like, YA has always been the forefront of diversity. But now to the point where we can actually have honest conversations with ourselves and other authors about what we need to do that's healthy. Yes, Twilight brought millions of people and to reading and yes, that's something that everybody can be thankful for. But you have to draw the line to where you have to be honest about things that are harmful to people. And I'm hoping that there were conversations had with Ms. Myers that she listened to.
All right. We are going to do one more question, and then we're going to wrap this thing up, which I think is an excellent question to end on. What do you hope your readers who struggle with mental illness will take away from your work?
Oh,
I love that.
That you're not alone, that no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, you are absolutely 100% not alone. And that even if I can't understand your specific experience, man, I'm telling you, I will be there to listen with an open ear. And there are people around you that are going to be there to listen with an open ear. And if you don't have someone around you to listen, there are so many wonderful resources that you can look at. I mean, I said, right, there's that button below us right now that you can click on and it'll take you to specific resources, but you have to take that first step. You have to be able to realize that something is not how it should be. I'm not going to say wrong because I think that's too harsh, but something is not how it should be. And you have to take care of yourself. I know that seems a little trite and whatnot, but think about it. There's only one you, and you need to be able to take care of yourself so everybody else can experience the joy that is you.
Very well said. Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're not alone is really what it comes down to for me. There's this quote that I've quoted, I feel like, in 70% of the panels and talks that I've done, from The History Boys, the play by Alan Bennett. And it's, the best moments in reading are the ones where you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things that you thought was particular to you. And here it is, laid down by someone you've never met, someone long dead even. And it's as if a hand has reached out and taken yours. And I think that's all that I'm ever trying to do in my writing, is be the hand that reaches out and takes someone else's hand.
I think, yeah, that was really good. Why am I going after you?
Yeah, Mark, don't mess it up now. Come on. You got to finish this, Mark.
I think for me, I'm very upfront about the fact that Anger is a Gift is a very difficult book. I know it's challenging. I know it's hard to read. It's strenuous at times. But I think the thing that I wanted more than anything else, and I hope is in every book, is this notion that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I wanted someone at 16 years old, when I was dealing with depression and anxiety and homelessness and being in the closet and all these different things, because we don't go through one thing and then another thing. We're not like a chapter in a book. We usually are like 8 chapters happening all at once and unfolding at the same time. But I wanted someone to tell me that I could survive the thing that I was going through. Because sometimes that's what someone who is struggling with mental illness needs. They just needs to know that there's something at the end of it. And
it's not even that you'll get better, but you'll survive.
You'll survive. Because and that's, I don't know if you've had this issue too, but it was why initially I was so mad at the "it gets better" thing. And I
was so angry with that.
Because I was like, it's not that it gets better, because sometimes it actually gets worse. Right.
And you're telling 15, 16-year-old kids, hey, it sucks right now, but guess what? Someday, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years from now, you'll be all right. Yeah, I got what they were trying to do, but I was so furious at that. So, Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like I want someone to just know that you can make it to the next page, that you can make it to the next chapter, that you can make it through a journey, and your journey might not be perfect. Your journey might not have joy in every step, but there is light there. There is something else. And so I like, putting characters through really difficult situations, and then they make it through, and they're a different person at the other side, but they've learned something, and their experience mattered, and none of it is negated. Like, it absolutely mattered to the end. So that's what I think. I want their, screw Morrissey, but I like there is a light that never goes out. Like, there's just something so beautiful. I know. Sorry. Yeah. Our heroes are trash. They're just the worst. Yeah. All day today, we've been just trashing on J.K. Rowling. She deserves it.
Yeah, she deserves it.
But I think of that, there is a light that never goes out. And that song and that image of there's just, I want the light to never go out. I want it to be there at the end.
I love that.
Yeah.
And on that note, our event, it's a wrap. Oh my gosh. Mark, Lauren, thank you all so much for participating in tonight's discussion. Thank you for being so candid. It was so moving, so fantastic. Everyone, please be sure to pre-order your copy of The Extraordinaries, Each of Us a Desert, and A Neon Darkness before they release later this summer and fall. A special thanks to the rest of the Torteen team who worked incredibly hard.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Torteen.
Best team, you guys. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, sending all of our well wishes and love to you all during this time. Stay safe, Stay positive, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Guys.